Hi, I'm Petra. That's what.
Hey, Petra. Hi.
What does it mean to be a spiritual person in the midst of the craziness of our, just our life these days? Whether it's raising children, going to work, having to deal with the pandemic, or our political situation.
Really practical ways to tap into spirituality. Science of Mind has done that for me, and I'm excited to be doing this work with Oscar and Petra to show you how you can get into your own spiritual ebb and flow and and say what? Live the life that you really want to live.
We're going to put hot topics, current events like meditation, law of attraction, and manifestation, all this stuff that you have questions about, that I have questions about. We're going to spin the wheel, and then wherever it lands is what we're going to talk about that day.
So we'll hope you'll join us on Tuesdays at 1 p.m. for Say What on YouTube Live.
Mhm. Right. Mhm.
I feel you, Oscar, because when we were getting all that news, and that still is happening in my community, Black people being harmed for no reason or just because somebody's having a bad day, all of the different things that were going on in the media, it just became kind of debilitating to have to keep watching. It's like I'm having to watch my brothers and sisters having been shot and killed in front of their children, and just it gets to a place where it's hard. It's devastating internally to have to process that.
And how important it is not to become numb to it, right? Not to turn our back on it, not to not look at it, and to, yeah. The thing for me too is that it's so incomprehensible. It's truly. So here's a 65-year-old woman, really stomping on her head is somehow going to stop the pandemic, or like what? And the holding of Black men as somehow inhuman, so they can just be shot in the streets. It is literally incomprehensible to me when we're all human beings. And I remember I think one of the first really most devastating stories for me is when they hung Matthew Shepard on the barbed wire fence in Wyoming. And for solely because he was gay. Right. And these, so yeah, there's so many things wrong with it. And I think that the most astonishing thing is how easily it's written off as a pathology, like a pathological, the guy, slaughtered all those Asian women in Georgia. Oh, he was a sex addict. Well, no, actually he was a white male. So he got away with it.
Right.
And it's like, are you freaking kidding me?
Right.
How is that possible? And and I'm sorry, I know many emotionally available and intelligent and grounded white men. I do. And it's extraordinary to watch their like incomprehensibility of it too. You know what I mean? Like, and how is it that we've lost? Well, I think these are such expressions of toxic masculinity. And how is it that we've lost what it means to have honor and and I remember having a conversation here at CSLDallas with I think it was right after Trayvon Martin. We opened up to people to be able to express, right? And I remember a woman in our community raising 3 Black sons. And we had deep conversations as a group, and then we split off white and Black and just talk about, thoughts and feelings. And she really she shared both in the group, and she shared with me specifically because she happened to be my partner, about her fear, right? And you talk about your mother, Oscar, and Shakera, I know you have a son and a husband, right? And she talked about her fear about her Black boys that she was raising by herself. And I thought, and I'm raising a young white man in Texas with all the guns, and I had spent so much time in his early years talking about, are you going to become a young man of character? I don't care if you're obedient. I want you to become a young man of character. And what does that, and what that means, and how do you handle disagreement, and how do you deal with your fear and your anger? And I noticed that I thought, well, any one of us who are white, who are raising white boys, well, that shooter, that stomper, right, that could be our sons. And and there's something so well, there's something not right in the way in which we're educating our children, especially our young men. On the other hand, we were talking about this before the show. I can't help but be grateful for social media, because it can't be hidden anymore.
Yeah.
Right? It cannot be hidden. We have to see it. We have to look at it, and we have to say, no, this is not how human beings behave. This is not how human beings behave towards each other. I don't care how fearful you are. I don't care how angry you are. We have to learn constructive, emotionally intelligent, spiritually grounded ways of dealing with our differences and our anger and our upset and our fear and all of that. But no, this, and I don't know any spiritual tradition that isn't grounded in this. What does it mean to be a good human being? Not like good, like you're pious and holy, and and somehow God's going to reward you with heaven or 72 virgins or whatever it is, right? Not that kind of good, but like a truly, good person who's, I just don't get it. And so I feel the need to apologize to both of you. No, really, I'm serious.
Oh,
Right, right. Right. Mhm. Right.
Mhm. Right, right.
Mhm.
Mm. I so love that you said that, Oscar, because I'm thinking about the fact that, Peter, you've been talking about language too and how important that is. And when we even talk about the idea of whiteness, that whole idea of whiteness, like that's a color, that is not an actual ethnic background, that is a construct, a set of systems. That whole white and black thing is what creates the idea and the invisibility of whiteness and the supremacy of whiteness. And I had to ask a question to one of my good friends who identifies as white. And I said, how would it feel if you disowned that identification, identified yourself as something different? Would you be able to still stand in the world and do the things that you want to do if you release that? And if you release the idea that being sorry for us is the way to help, if you release the idea that the projection that my son is going to have a different experience than your black son or my black son, right, is going to have a different experience than her white son, that projection in and of itself is creating more of the same monster, right? And so it's like, let's stop the projection of my experience is going to be different than yours, it's going to be better,
Right.
or you got to stop doing that. We have
Right.
to really use the tools that you're teaching with the science of mind. You've been doing this 30 years, girlfriend. OMG, right? We're teaching each other and we're learning these things to use them and take them into our lives and show up differently. And I think that's a huge part of it, that identification.
Well, I think you say something really important, Shakira. And I had this thought a few years ago, but you've brought it up again. I remember years ago, going through the demographics, blah 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 blah, and there weren't nearly as many choices. But I remember that white wasn't one of them. Actually,
Mhm.
what was on there was Caucasian, which is actually correct, right? I'm Caucasian. I'm about as Nordic as you can get, even though I'm German. Like I don't even know how to sweat. It was coming to Texas was it was awful. It took 10 years for my body to learn how to sweat. Is that just ridiculous or not? Right? Because I'm so freaking Nordic. I don't know where it comes from. I mean, my family's very, 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 very German. Like, I don't know how many centuries back, but my physique, right? And I'm one of those people, I like meat. Thank you very much. Meat and vegetables. I don't care about breads. And it's crazy. But I am like, if you were to ask if what would be actually correct is that I'm Caucasian, right? And I suppose I would be German American. But it's really interesting because when my parents immigrated to the United States, my mother didn't speak English, she was German. They were both German, and she only spoke German, and my dad got a job here. And they made a deliberate decision that they were going to move here and they were going to be Americans because they were moving out of Germany for a reason. Now, I spoke German in the home until I was 10 years old. We had German culture. We traveled to Europe because that's where all my family was. I absolutely valued, understood, and completely loved my German heritage. But I was being raised as an American, not as a German American. Although in Philadelphia, there were lots and lots and lots of German Americans. But being Caucasian, one did not have to announce that one was German American or Irish American or Slavic American or whatever, right? One was Caucasian and therefore just American, which I have a visceral problem with labels, period. Right? And I think there's two sides to that coin. How important it is for us to bring our identity forward and be proud of who we are and our heritage and our culture and our families and all of that. And yet ultimately that has nothing to do with the spiritual truth of who we are. Right? So I happen to be married to a woman, but I've never really identified as LGBT, but I also don't identify as heterosexual either. I just identify as a spiritual being, right? And so I have the luxury of not overly identifying with my skin color. I have the luxury of that, right? Although I've certainly experienced it traveling around the world because I'm blonde and blue-eyed and willowy. Ooh, man. I can certainly understand what it is to experience feeling the otherness of it and how frightening that can be. And I have stories about that, which is for another time. But I have the luxury of that because my skin tone, which isn't white, it's actually sort of pinky, browny, pinky, beigey. Right? It's not really white at all. It doesn't look like the wall behind me or behind you, Shakera. It's like, so yes, I was going somewhere with all of that. So I find that there's a delicate balance between how important it is to identify, and yet ultimately from a spiritual point of view, we have to grow through that and let it go. Right. But we can only let go of something that has been acknowledged.
Right.
Right. It's the same thing if you go into the spiritual traditions and they're let go of your ego, let go of your ego, let go of your ego. Well, if you don't have a healthy ego, I've seen people that are very spiritual who are not emotionally intelligent at all and who are basically crazy to be around, right? Because they haven't developed a healthy ego, a healthy sense of self, a healthy sense of boundaries, a healthy sense of, how do you psychologically work in the world, which you can then let go of as we engage in our spiritual identity. And so that identifying is really important. And yet from a spiritual point of view and our unity and our oneness as human beings and as spiritual beings, I just want to pound my table on my fist on the table and say, we are so much better than this. Yeah. And I don't understand how we can be so hateful to each other.
Yeah.
I don't understand it. I mean, there's no rationale. There's no spiritual system. There's no thought process that can be made that makes sense of that. Right.
I've tried so hard to think about this, and I truly cannot. I've asked the question, why? Why is this happening? And last night's conversation, something popped up about power, about the idea that that allyship means being okay with release or sharing power, and people just aren't willing to that's the term white supremacy. But it also has to do with money. Like some of the conversation became some about media and how you see that projects with diversity are making more money now. They just make more money than just all white casts, period. So for the first time now money is actually talking, and we're slowly moving towards diversity works. So now there's a financial impetus. So it's all so but it's creepy that like, oh, we have to make money for there to be equity.
Well, it's called enlightened self-interests. It's
Yeah,
Adam
yeah.
Smith, The Wealth of Nations, right? And from this Scottish guy from the 1700s, he understood something about the human psyche, which, as quite frankly, embarrassing as it might be, there is something about the marketplace being ultimately a place of correctiveness, because it's challenging to legislate you will be nice to each other. I mean, how do you legislate that, right? And you know, it's constantly being worked on. And the legislation of rights, there's no question about it that it's necessary and needed. And yet we've also seen the abuse of that, and it just gets further and further and further and further. And, you know, and it's like, okay, really, could we just have some sanity, like some rationality in all of this? This idea that we're finding that, well, when we're spiritually grounded, we find that within us. And when we don't have that, it's unfortunate, but it is in fact enlightened self-interest that causes us to then see we can't keep behaving this way. Yeah. Right. And so we can roll our eyes and say, it's too bad it's money. I say, thank God. Thank God it's something. Right. Thank God it's something. And, you know, and it's the environmental movement's been dealing with this for years. Oh, they only look green. Well, you know what? That little bit of looking green is actually moving the ball forward.
Right.
And we're so much forward 30 years because the marketplace has discovered they make money by being green, but they also have to start really, really being green, right? And I mean, and we see it in some really large stores that I don't shop at, how green they are, right? And because of enlightened self-interest. And so, you know, and so I say use it ruthlessly. Why not? If we can't be better than that from our deepest spiritual truth, then let's use our human, what is that? Our human weirdness, our human, you know what I mean? That's what it takes, right? Yeah. Okay, well, if that's what it takes, then whatever works to bring us to that different.
Yeah. Can you say that again? What's the term? Enlightened self-interest?
Enlightened self-interest.
I'm going to write that
Adam
down.
Smith's work called The Wealth of Nations, 1745, I believe, Scottish guy. Yeah. And it was just at the beginning of the free market, and capitalism was starting to kind of grow. And I mean, there's not everything he said actually, you know, whatever, but there's something about that you can watch in the marketplace. And as I said, so why not use that, right? Why not?
Yeah. So for those of us, sorry, for those of you who are just joining us, we're getting some really awesome viewers. So you guys, apparently my mic wasn't working in the beginning, so no one knows what the hell we're talking about. So this whole conversation started because this morning a news came out that in Midtown of New York City, a 65-year-old Asian woman grandmother was walking to church in front of a luxury high-rise, and she was kicked to the ground and stomped on the head over and over. And the camera showed three men, a security guard and three men in the building, who saw it happening and didn't do anything. And after the guy ran away and the woman was laying on the ground, the security guard walked to the front of the building and closed the door on her. So that is what's prompting all of this juicy conversation about calls and what's happening. And so sorry, my mic wasn't working, but that's what we're talking about. All of this
we
stuff.
Heard you. I'm sorry.
You guys heard us, but our viewers didn't. So thank God people are on there like, we can't hear Oscar. So you guys are awesome. Thank you for the comments. You guys rock.
Yeah. Well, and so going back to your comment then about power and money, right? Yeah. I do remember having this conversation with someone who then ultimately left our community, a white man, and doesn't matter what the whole conversation was about. It doesn't really make any difference. But there was a moment of where this person said to me, well, I just feel like I'm losing my place. I just feel like I just don't, I just don't count anymore. You're always talking about all these other people.
Mm.
And I said, and how does that feel?
Mm.
The rest of the world is walking around feeling that way all the time.
Wow.
That's what has to be shared. I mean, ultimately it shows up as power and money and whatever, right? But it's the idea that if there's a minority, that means there's a majority.
Yeah.
Right? And the majority always feels safer because, well, I'm part of the crowd. I mean, we even do it in our voting, 51%. I'm in the majority, right? So I'm okay. I'm good. I'm good. Right. And I do the religion of the majority. Therefore, I feel very safe. I know that I'm doing the right thing. Right. And yet 51%, like, where's the, I mean, 49% is a whole lot of other people.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
Who are doing something different, thinking something different, seeing something different, and they can't all be wrong because, right? And so what's happening is we're at least in the United States, we're experiencing the loss of majority, right? We're seeing it in the Christian community, with the rhetoric that's coming out of the evangelical Christian community, right? And the very, very fundamentalist Christian community. We're seeing it in the white community, because what's happening is ultimately it's the sense of I'm no longer the majority, which means power, money, all that things, everything shifts.
Yeah.
Right. And I do then actually have to share it.
Mm.
The problem, of course, is that we've also seen minorities, as we talked about last week, we've seen minorities juggle against each other. Well, I'm more of a majority than you are. You're more of a minority than I am, right? And so that becomes, that whole milieu. But he was exactly right. He was, in fact, losing something.
Mm.
Right? He was that position of unconscious. It really is always about me.
Yeah.
As the primary audience, the primary person who's being sold stuff, the primary person who is being, elevated. I mean, everything, right?
Yeah.
Everything. And theoretically, all of these conversations could teach us compassion, deep and profound, walking in another person's shoes. If I am losing my sense of my place and my sense of power and the majority because of it, right? What an amazing opportunity that is to walk in the moccasins of any other person, whether they're Black or women or gay or Asian or disabled or old or too young or whatever, right? I mean, whatever it is, all of a sudden there's an opportunity for profound compassion and recognition. Wow, this is what it feels like. Right? And so for me, from the Science of Mind point of view, that equalizing should actually then allow us to see that where everybody gets to have that experience.
Yeah.
Right? Why shouldn't everybody experience themselves as a majority, as part of the majority? Because we're all freaking human beings.
Yeah.
That's right.
Right? That's
Exactly.
the majority we belong to.
Yeah, exactly. Wow. I feel like, oh my gosh, that was really mind blowing, that story, because like the idea of like him feeling like he's starting to become invisible, because I feel like my whole life that's exactly what I felt my entire life. Like I never saw anything about Asian Americans anywhere. We weren't represented in any spectrum of media or art or news anywhere. We were just never talked about or seen. And it goes back to that model minority that like, well, they're white adjacent. they're like white on probation. They are smart and they're good at math and they have great jobs and they're rich. All are myths, all are stereotypes that aren't true. But the point of it was when that was perpetrated, that was when the civil rights movement was at its peak, when African Americans were getting rights and were making a change and were getting more and more rights, closer and closer to equality and equity. And at that point, that's when they put out the model minority. It was a huge public campaign, and it was at its core was to pit Asian Americans against all other people of color. Hispanics, blacks, Native Americans, all of them. But like, why are you complaining? Your views, your fight for equality isn't valid because look at Asians. And that's how that model minority myth started. And it has just caused so much havoc in our ability to organize, our ability to join the conversation. Because throughout our whole lives, we're like, oh, they're fine. They have nothing to complain about. But us, we're like, oh, but you say that we're this. You say that we're like white people, but we're not seen or treated or have the opportunities of white people. So we're sort of in this weird limbo. And it's important to call out that even within our community, there is inherent racism. There's a hierarchy of like Chinese, Korean, Filipino, like there's this crazy diaspora of Asian, what Asian American means. And there's racism within that. And so many of us fall into the model minority myth. We pit ourselves against African Americans. And it's like, stop doing that. You are falling into the trap. You are still seeing people, human beings, as other. Mm-hmm. That is exactly what they want us to do. Mm-hmm. Stop falling into the trap. Stop falling into that hole. So I love that you brought that invisible thing, because I felt that all my life, and now for the first time we're visible, but we're seen as subhumans. We're seen as like, let's attack them. Like, it's okay to attack them because they're at fault for the coronavirus. And it's like, we've lived here for 20 years. Like, this is all we've known. Some of us were born here. Like, what are you talking about? Like, did not come from China. We came from Chicago, or like, it just doesn't make any sense. But for the first time we're seeing, but now I'm seeing that we are seen as subhuman. That you can just, like, look at George Floyd, for heaven's sake. Like, yes, we are seeing the African American community. We are seeing Black Lives Matter. But what caused that was the whole world seeing a white man stomp on his neck and just lay there and watch him die. Mm-hmm. So we're not seen visible as equals or as humans, but as subhumans. That you can do things too, that we are the target of hate or discrimination. It's just so scary and so tough to talk about and to wrap your head around, because like, I felt it as a kid but couldn't verbalize it. And now as an adult, you start questioning, like, oh, is this intuition, or is this false beliefs and bad programming from my youth? Like, you see what I mean? Everything is suddenly in a tailspin, because like, I don't know if this is intuition or if it's just my bad programs running again. And it just fucks with everything. Like, you question everything all of a sudden because of what you're seeing happening.
I don't know, guys. This is a lot, because I'm sitting here and I'm just like, I feel you, and I'm also hearing, the other portions of this conversation. And it's like, there's the want for approval from an oppressive entity to be seen as one with them, and then to capitalize on the disenfranchisement of the people, and then all of a sudden come back around to, well, now we want to be seen as human beings. And there's a whole lot of energy around this whole thing, and it does take a lot of dialogue. And the thing I am grateful for is that we can have these dialogues together, but there are pieces of this conversation that are not, really fully making themselves present. And so this part of the conversation is a little tough for me, because
is there something that you want to make present? That you feel like
I think that there was, like when you talked about the civil rights movement, Oscar, about the Blacks were making this movement, and all of a sudden it was, not a valid thing, or they don't have anything to be worried about and all that. that whole energy is perpetuated over and over again when Black people attempt to make a movement. Black Lives Matters has become all different types of things. And, you know, they talk about Asian lives matter. It's not that Asian lives don't matter, but that's a movement for the awareness from Black people. And I don't think
Yes.
that it should be stumped out, right?
Agreed.
I don't think
Yeah.
that it should be diluted because there is a need for that particular awareness. And then I also don't agree with, you know, let's capitalize on now Black Lives Matter. So let's diversify everything so that we can capitalize on it, but we have no particular interest in giving back to those communities that actually need the assistance.
Right.
Or those particular, that part just kind of rubs me, you know, and that's just my honest opinion. It rubs me a bit. And
but just so you know, it wasn't us saying the civil rights movement wasn't valid. It's like,
no.
Yeah, it was the point of model minority was to make an argument that they weren't valid.
Absolutely.
Like it was used as a weapon against all of us. That's what I was trying to make. Not to say, I'm not trying to say like the civil rights matter wasn't valid. That's not what the point was.
No, I'm not calling you.
Okay, I'll make sure you didn't didn't receive it like that.
On that, it's just there has been, and I mean you can tell there's been the capitalization on that disenfranchisement though.
Yeah.
You know, and that's where some of those elders that were talking that I told you all about last week, that's where the anger and the pain comes in, because it's like, okay, so it's okay to capitalize and have the selfish interest and gain on somebody else's oppression, but then now, you know, it's not to say that everybody else's oppression is okay, but this part, the awareness of this part is not really being talked about as much. It's nobody needs to suffer, but yes, and nobody also should capitalize on the disenfranchisement of anybody either.
Yeah.
You know, and without the and not even it's just so much. And it, because at the same time I can stand back and give thanks that ultimately Spirit works all of that out. And I think it sounded to me that's what you were saying, Petra. I might not have really caught that in full, but in the beginning it sounded like you were saying that ultimately these things do end up working themselves out in the public sphere, in the public arena, that they end up switching spaces. And so I can't be one to say how it should go, right? But ultimately it does work out. But this right here, that rubs for me. It rubs a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, you know? And I think you're saying something really important, Shakera, right? And so this comes out of William Barber's work in the Poor People's Campaign, right? And one of his deep conversations is the intersectionality of oppression, and how important it is to actually see this intersectionality. And so, the whole tone of the Poor People's Campaign, which, as you may recall, is sort of the second piece of Martin Luther King's campaign after the civil rights portion of it, is the idea that when we see oppression in one area or one people or one group, that it's critical to understand that it's not in isolation, and that this intersectionality happens. And if we don't see the intersectionality, what happens is we are divided. And how does, so for Reverend William Barber in the Poor People's Campaign, right? He wants to add the Black Lives Matter campaign to the women's rights campaign, to the LGBT campaign, now to the Asian American campaign, to the climate issues, to the homeless and poverty, right? Because ultimately they all are part and parcel of a culture. They're part and parcel of the underbelly of a culture. And it is in voicing this intersectionality that we begin to see that each group's experience, well, one, it's not in isolation. Two, it impinges on the other group's experiences. And the divide, and in the divide, we are conquered. That's the whole idea of intersectionality. If we are only about Black Lives Matter, not that isn't massively important. If we are only about that, it's easier to dilute it and cast it aside. Well, but all lives matter. Or, well, it's just not that bad, right?
Yeah.
But if we add Black Lives Matter to Asian hate crimes, to the unequal pay of women, to the way all of this is playing out in our climate, in our economies, in the food deserts, in just Wintergeddon here in Texas, and whose communities were the most affected. Right. We begin to see that it's in the coming together and the recognition of this intersectionality, and how as long as Asians and Black people and Latinos and LGBT people and Black people and white allies, and as long as there's an opportunity for this and divisiveness, the power doesn't see. It's in the intersectionality that we actually become the majority.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. So how do we do that without co-opting? Right? From the different movements, how do we do it without co-opting, but recognizing that when we're all marching down the street together, saying that all of these things are outpicturings of something that's toxic in our culture, that doesn't work in our culture, when all of that actually comes together, that becomes the majority. And what we know from a spiritual point of view, right, that becomes the critical mass. That's the critical mass of consciousness that then shifts the whole thing forward into a different viewpoint. And all of a sudden, all of those things that were before maybe not acceptable, but we were seeing them in social media all the time, all of a sudden they become so grossly unacceptable, they literally begin to disappear. You don't even have to fight for it anymore, because consciousness itself has shifted. And so that's, for me, the value of the bringing it together. Right. And I get the rub, and yet because when I first started really studying this whole idea of intersectionality and William Barber's work and all of that, I was like, well, I don't know, but there's something really coherent about it. Right? Because ultimately what we want is humanity to be in the majority.
Right.
Wow.
And I agree with all of what you said. My thing is not that the intersectionality doesn't matter. It's that if it's going to matter in one place, let it matter in every place.
Yeah.
Right. So let's not just not be for Black hatred or anything that happens in terrorism only for the purpose of bonding together for this situation and then making money off of any other oppressive situation. Do you see what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, totally.
I guess I just don't know of any examples of that specifically, but I see what you're trying to say. Absolutely. I mean, it feels like
it got to go together all the way around. We've got to make sure that we're really serious about it all the way around as community.
Yeah.
That's where I'm at with it, because I don't agree with, I want to make a whole bunch of money on Black Lives Matter, and I want to grow my business because Black Lives Matter, and I want to, or Asian Lives Matter, any of those different ideas. I don't want to see businesses and companies decide to do all this diversification only for the area
Bottom
of
line.
Making money.
Yeah.
Right, the bottom line, and then not really stand for that.
Exactly.
Yeah, but see, there's the thing, right?
What is
in the argument of enlightened self-interest, right? It's the same argument that we use in spiritual growth. On the one hand, we change our consciousness and our behavior changes, right? But remember, we had this conversation a few weeks ago. There's another way of doing it. You act as if, and then it becomes true. And so what if doing it for the money is in fact acting as if? But the truth is, if they act as if long enough, it is actually going to become a larger and larger and larger part of the culture. And so is it the best possible way? No. Would we love for it to come from people's good intentions and, really be, of course.
Right.
but at some point, you know what I mean? Let's take what we can get.
Yeah.
Right on because there are people who are doing it from their character and their belief and whatever and again, I have only the environmental movement to go on because I've been an environmentalist since the 70s, and I've watched over the years over and over and over and over again companies that have kind of put the green face on. It's kind of but it's not so well, they've been sued. They've been called, they've been called to the carpet in the public forum. They've been right. And so over time, they either get out of the green business or they actually become what they said they were doing. Right. But it's kind of that act as if, and then all of a sudden now they're they're looking green and they're getting more green. And now their competitors going, well, holy shit, they're making more money than I'm making.
Yeah.
I better get some green products out there. Well, that can only be to the good of the environment. And every time that there's a falseness discovered, right, we've seen it over the last 30 years. It that whistle gets blown and it goes up into the public eye, and then they're called into the carpet, and then they, and is it perfect? Is it a perfect system? No, and not by any means. But if people aren't willing to act by character, let's get them through their pocketbook. That's what I mean. Maybe that's cynical. I don't know.
No, not at all. I mean, we call that getting canceled. But now,
right
in 2021,
no, I don't understand that. Could I just plead my complete ignorance?
Yes.
I do not understand the phrase cancel culture. Could you please explain?
It's what you just said. It's when either like a huge rich celebrity or someone super rich with a lot of power, a politician or a big giant company, when they say something and they get caught doing something else or lying about it. Canceled means the entire, social media, they don't play. Gen Z on TikTok, they don't play. They all come together. They, as a community, they organize together and they straight up rip them to shreds.
Yes.
And they are canceled. That's cancel culture.
Okay,
so
great.
It's the same thing. It's the same thing we're talking about, but we just call it canceled.
Right. Well, and see, that to me is the recognition. It's the recognition of the law outpicturing. Consciousness will, in fact, reveal itself. So if you're doing the Black Lives Matter because in the diversity deal only to make more money, it is going to bite you in the ass.
Yeah.
But you have still moved the ball forward. And at least in the environmental movement, I would say most of the people that have been called to the carpet like that have continued to move in the direction where they pretended to be going. I do believe that there are some that didn't, no question about it, and they tried to cover it up and blah, 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 blah. But right, but consciousness reveals itself. And so that's the other thing that I trust. You're going to play that game, it's going to show up.
Yeah.
And people are going to figure it out.
Yeah.
I
want to go back to Shakira's point. Shakira, I have to go back to your point about co-opting because it was so powerful what you said, because you were right. When that Atlanta thing first started, I started seeing some like Asian Lives Matter. I was like, but here's what happened. All the Asian activists were like, no, we are not co-opting this. We marched with Black Lives Matter because our Black brothers and sisters have paved the way for us. We are not co-opting this this is theirs. That's why we now have hashtag Stop Asian Hate. And we saw our Black brothers and sisters come in and support hashtag Stop Asian Hate. So we got each other's backs. But you're right. When I saw Asian Lives Matter, I was like, that doesn't feel, we shouldn't be, no. We are not co-opting this. We don't have a right to touch this. Yeah. So, but we did call ourselves out and was like, no, don't touch that. That's theirs. We're happy to jump on board with them and they're going to jump on board with our hashtag. But do not do this weird thing where we're just grabbing at each other's. Just don't do that. So that was a great point that you made.
And also, I appreciate you, Oscar. And also, Petra, I appreciate you breaking that down, because that's that part I meant about coming back around to Spirit's going to work it out anyway. And so the way that you break things down, girlfriend.
I know, girl. She's
like,
so good. She's so good. I know.
If you have not been in a class, I mean, you have got to check out CSLDallas' class. If you are into anything, learning spiritual, development and personal growth, just anywhere in your life, you really want to get into a class with this woman,
I know,
and
girl.
she will break it down.
Yeah, on
No, but
Sunday
that's exactly
mornings.
what I
Sunday
love.
mornings are Science of Mind
Yeah,
class. Girl, get in that. It's on Zoom.
yeah.
It's on Facebook Live. You have to check that out. Every Sunday, I'm just like, what is happening in this class? Like
I'm
last
telling
Sunday,
you.
she said just a very simple. She said it so like nonchalant, just off the cuff, and I remember just going like, but she said faith is a verb. And my entire head exploded. I felt like I was gonna set my house on fire. She said faith is a verb. And I was like,
Right.
what? Like, so there are all these, yeah. So if you haven't taken a class of Petra, stop what you're doing right now. Go to stop watching us right now. Go to CSLDallas.org. Look at the events. Look at the calendar. Get into class, because this freaking woman will blow your mind and change your freaking life. She's unbelievable.
Oh, thank you, Oscar. Thank you, Shakera. I love doing this with you guys. I think you are equally as incredible, truthfully, or I wouldn't be doing it with either one of you. It's awesome. I love our conversations.
I love it too.
Mhm.
God, we're so lucky that we have each other, that we're able to do this.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. And
Yeah.
then just right at the perfect time, right at the perfect time in the world. I think this is us being spirit outpictured as connectivity, as conversation, as dialogue, as love for each other. It blows my mind every time.
Yeah.
This will make you show up for sure. Well, you know that it's working. You know what I'm saying? We're doing
Yeah.
something. Just something.
Mhm.
I love
Something.
that. And Karen reminds us on the chat that love is a verb too.
Love
God, I
is a
love
verb,
Karen.
too.
That is a
That's
verb.
right.
Yas, Karen.
Yeah.
Oh, and Lewis, hashtag intersectionality. Yeah,
Whoop, whoop.
that needs to be a
Yeah.
hashtag. That is so good.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, that whole idea that divide and conquer. I mean, there's what it's probably Machiavellian. That's probably where it comes from. That whole idea, and we need to not be divided,
Yeah.
not be divided from each other. Right? It's so important, and yet it's so important that each identity, different people are definitely having different experience, similar but different. Right? That's that.
Yeah.
There's so much, and there's so much deep spiritual truth in all of it. So much of an opportunity for us to really, really dig into our spirituality. Yeah, just, my question for me that I constantly ask myself, where do I stand? Where do I stand in this? And you said this morning, Oscar, with what am I supposed to do with this 65-year-old woman, right? What are we supposed to do? Literally watching a Black man die on social media. It's terrific. It's horrific. What are we supposed to do with it? Well, we have to find a place to stand. And just even some things in my own life. And I can't act, or I can't speak, or I can't move until I have really, I've listened to my feelings. I've listened to my rant that I want to make 2 or 3 or 4 times, probably different rants. And then I've really tried to look for my spiritual truth, right? And somewhere in there, that as I circle through all of those, finding that place to stand. How am I going to, from where am I going to come? As opposed to, what am I going to do? What am I going to say? What am I going to, right? From where am I going to come? It's the only thing I know to do, to then speak, then move, then respond, then act, right? And then, because just ranting doesn't really do anything. Just raging doesn't do anything. Just putting our head in the sand doesn't do anything. Talking is good. I also find sometimes, there's a lot of talking in the echo chamber.
Yeah.
Right? But finding that spiritual place to stand. And it doesn't deny our human feelings or our human thoughts. Kind of, yeah. And that's not always easy. It's not always easy to know.
Yeah.
Know what that is. So yes. So my belief is that spirit's working itself out as us, not like out there somewhere. right? Spirit is working itself out as us, and we are seeing in living color what it looks like to choose out of fear, what it looks like to act out of that deep sense of separation from others. We're seeing it in living color. It's just it's unavoidable, which is, and so that's where the opportunity for good to come out of it is.
Wow.
Right. But we have to look, we have to watch, we have to see.
Yeah. Y'all, this is one hell of an episode. I don't know how we keep getting on these conversations, and then we don't even need the wheel at this point. Holy cow.
I don't. Yeah.
Wow. You guys, everyone out there on YouTube, thank you for joining us. We love you so much. We see you. We love you. Thank you. We're out of time today, but listen, join us next week.
We'll do the wheel next week.
We'll do the wheel next week.
As long as there's no other ridiculous thing in the news, right?
That's right. So next Tuesday at 1 p.m. we'll be here on YouTube Live. Grab a lunch, come join us, join the conversation, comment all you want. We read them and we'll talk about it. And check out CSLDallas.org for all of our upcoming classes and events and opportunities for us to be together. If you want to meet us in person or talk to us, you can find us on socials, slide into our DMs. But also this Sunday is Easter celebration. And if you haven't been to one of our Easter celebrations, we're going to blow your mind. So y'all, check all the info's online, CSLDallas.org. Check it out. We'd love to see you there. We'd love to meet you in person. We love you so much.